If you're looking at buying a property in Alaska, you're probably really excited, and for a lot of you, you're also learning about a whole lot of new stuff here that you have not had to deal with before when it comes to buying a property. So we're going to be talking about what those are today. Before we get started though, my name's Jamin Gurker. I'm an associate real estate broker in the state of Alaska. My mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate, and specifically coach you in buying or selling real estate in Anchorage, Wasilla, or Palmer. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's video talking about those things that make Alaska homes so unique. Now, the first thing that a lot of people really have questions about when they're looking at moving to Alaska is, hey, what's so unique about the well? You know, most people, they've just been connected to the city water their entire life, and they're just not really sure how this thing works. They know it's important for the house and, actually getting water, but what all do they need to do with it? Well, a lot of people are relieved to find out that once you've got a well up and going and it's operating, you're just really not even going to realize every day whether or not you have a well or you're on the city. You turn on the faucet and the water turns on. There's really nothing to it. The big difference is going to be during the buying process. We want to do a couple of tests to make sure that the water does what we want it to do, to make sure it's going to be good for you. Number one, we take a well flow test. In other words, how much water does this well actually produce per minute? Myself, for property I own over in the Wasilla area, well flow is right at about 4 or 5 gallons per minute, which, that does work. The pressure can be a little low sometimes, but, it's definitely not the end of the world. There are other people I've seen where it's been like 12 gallons per minute, so that's doing pretty good. And there's really, you just have to make sure that if the well flow quantity, the water that you're getting from there suddenly drops, that might be a sign that you're going to have to pay to drill a second well that's actually going to be deeper than the first one, so you can really access that water that's down in the little aquifer. Now, also keep in mind, wells are going to be a little bit more seasonal. Some times of the year, the water pressure might be really low. Like I remember one property I have over in Eagle River, and it's also on a well. And during the summertime, like I noticed when everyone was out there watering their lawns and everything, the pressure was just not great. I was still getting water and everything that I needed. It just wasn't at the same rate as what it was during the winter months. So if there's a lot of use in the area suddenly of water, you're going to notice, hey, you may or may not get the same pressure that you got before. It might start kind of dropping down a little bit. If it gets really low, you can certainly have some kind of a holding tank that just fills up. It's just hundreds of gallons of water, and it kicks in and helps if you really need it. That's kind of rare though. Usually you're only going to see those holding tanks if you're somewhere like up on the side of a mountain and it's 300-400 feet just to get down to any water, and obviously that's going to take a lot to get the water up that high. So that's really step number one, the quantity. Now the next thing you're going to be looking at when you're considering a well or testing a well is going to be the quality of the water. Now, just because the water is coming up from the ground and this is fresh, water from a well in Alaska, does not necessarily mean that it's going to be pristine, great condition, not contaminated, and it's going to be safe to drink. You have to take the well quality test, and for that we send that off to the lab. Well, the engineer sends it off to the lab and has it evaluated. Now, for me personally, they have a actually, let me just explain. So when they send it to the lab, there's kind of a basic real estate thing that you're looking for. You're looking for a lot of the basic stuff like E. coli, stuff like that, stuff that's in the water. I like to go a little bit further and test for things like arsenic as well, if it's me personally buying the property. I can talk about this in another video, but actually didn't buy a piece of land a little bit ago because I paid a little bit extra to have an arsenic test done, and it popped for arsenic. The rest of it looked perfectly fine, but arsenic is obviously not a great thing. We'll talk more about that in another video. But after you've gone through those two qualifications, the well flow And the well quality, it's more or less just going to operate just like the normal water and everything from the city, and something you might just be cognizant of, like I said, seasonally, if the well flow suddenly just drops. Another thing you want to keep in mind is kind of where the line from the well is leading into the house. You know, if you have a line, let's say, that goes under the garage slab to get to the house to give water to the property, you want to make sure during the wintertime that slab doesn't completely freeze, because that's going to be a great opportunity for that line to freeze, and it's going to cost you about $500 to get the lines thawed out, and hopefully there's no damage to the rest of the lines along the way. Ask me how I know that. All right, so that's all about wells. Let's move on to the septic system. Now, when we're looking at the septic system, there's really not, it's going to be more or less kind of like the well, where it's going to be out of sight, out of mind, and you're just going to kind of forget year to year just that it's even there, that you're on a septic as opposed to sewer. The big difference is going to be that there is kind of an expiration date for those septic systems. So the way the septic system works, I'm going to give you just kind of like a very 30,000 foot view, elementary school understanding. They've got a big tank, and if the content in the tank goes above a certain level, it spills over and it goes into the leach field. Now, the leach field is just a bunch of rocks and everything they set up there, and it's set to really absorb all that content if something does kind of spill up and over where that level is within the tank. Now, you want the leach field is going to be underground, by the way. Now, over the course of about 20-30 years, most of these septic tanks are going to be made of steel, and after that long of being underground and having the contact, you can actually just take a ballpoint pen and just poke a hole right through it. So in some places like Anchorage, you actually do have to effectively, you have to replace the septic system if it's 30 years or older, which can be expensive. So if you've got a system that's getting on the older side, that is something you just have to expect. Hey, this is, as of the time of this video, I've heard estimates around $10,000, $12,000, but it really depends on all that's going to be involved. I've heard these systems costing anywhere like upwards of like 20, maybe 30 grand or so. So you just have to make sure that you know exactly what is going to be going into it. And then also, if there's any special considerations with the soil for the septic system. If the ground is really marshy, it's going to be pretty expensive if you're going to be putting it in. I give no ballpark idea for how much that's going to be, because it's going to be such a unique system. They're probably going to have to build a mound and then have the septic go into that, as opposed to just burying it down into the ground. So that's why I kind of, that's something you definitely got to be aware of. All right, the next thing that really does kind of make Alaska a little bit different is we've got crawl spaces up here in Alaska. Now, what makes the Alaskan houses a little unique is we've got all the snow that's going to be on the side of the house. That snow melts, the ground's going to be full of water, and that water's got to go somewhere, and where it's going to go is probably going to be the crawl space, or at least the soil that's beneath the house that's in the crawl space. So what we do here to make sure that you don't get a whole lot of moisture intrusion and a lot of issues with potential mold growth and stuff like that is you put down a vapor barrier, and that does a lot to keeping that moisture contained down and keeps the water in the ground where it's supposed to be. Because you really don't want your crawl space flooded, and if you want a good way to give yourself better chances for when the breakup happens, you want to take all the snow and move it about 5-10 feet away from the side of the house, because when that snow melts, like I said, the water's got to go somewhere, and yes, the crawl space is there, but also I just don't play around with water in the crawl space, so that's what I would recommend. All right, now the next thing that I am going to be really aware of if I'm buying a home in Alaska, what kind of makes the properties here different. This is specifically if you're buying something really in Palmer, Alaska, is there is a lot of wind here, and there's a lot of glacier silt that kind of gets kicked up by the wind. And if you don't know what glacier silt is, it's this really, really, really fine sand, and it gets picked up and kind of whirls around in the air and everything. And when there's a lot of wind, that silt can actually get up into like the little baffles of the house and in the eaves, and you can get a lot of glacier silt just kind of building up within the house itself. Also, you can get, if there's a lot of wind and there's snow out, it's the same thing. The snow can get up into the eaves and into the roof itself. So if you've had a lot of wind happen lately during the winter time, you just have to go up there and make sure you don't have a big old snowdrift forming in the middle of your the attic, because you can imagine how big of a surprise that's going to be during breakup season when things start warming up and all the snow in the attic starts melting. All right, let's take a break here real quick. For those of you who've been watching for a bit, you do know that I host a meetup for people who've recently moved up here. If you're moving up here or you've already been up here for a little bit and you want an opportunity to kind of start meeting people who are in the same boat as you and just trying to establish those connections, do feel free to go ahead and join our monthly meetup group. That is a private Facebook group. You can't find it just by looking for it. Link for that is only in the description section down below, and that is the only place where I'm posting and talking about upcoming events. And it's just a great time to kind of relax and get to know people a little bit. So if that's sounds like your cup of tea, then that's going to be a great place for you to start making those inroads and building those relationships in the state. Now, let's go and finish up today's video. All right, now another thing that I am really cognizant of about that kind of makes Alaska homes kind of unique, and this is really in the Mat-Su Valley more so than anywhere else, though I've had issues with this in Anchorage as well, and that is going to be encroachments. Alaska is still a pretty young state, and back in the literal Wild West days, people just kind of built willy-nilly, and they just kind of eyeballed it and like where the property boundaries were. And sometimes you can get homes and properties where entire structures are built that goes over the dadgum boundary of the property, and that's oh so annoying when you find it, because there's really no easy solutions, and you have to go through the whole bureaucratic process and everything. And just don't do it. For the love of everything that's good and holy, if you're building a property, get an as-built survey done. It's $400 or $500, and it's going to save you potentially a lot of headache in the future. Measure twice, cut once, and that applies, I'm going to say 10 times over if you're dealing with an entire structure. Okay, so off of that, but the big thing is you just want to make sure your property doesn't extend into somebody else's, the one that you're looking at purchasing, and none of the neighbors have stuff that encroaches on yours. If you don't have an updated as-built survey that just shows the boundary of the property and then where the structures in the property sits on that lot, then there's always a risk that there is some kind of an encroachment either onto or from the property that you're looking at. Another thing you really have to keep in mind if you are purchasing a property, specifically during the winter time, is you don't know exactly what's under the snow. And sometimes we've got summer photos and those really do help, but sometimes we're seeing a property and we don't know if there's a lot of junk in the yard that's just kind of being hidden by the snow. So it's just something for you to be aware of if you were looking at purchasing specifically during the winter time. All right, next thing is going to be moss on the roofs. This isn't necessarily super unique to Alaska, but I feel like it does happen here more so than other places. Now, the moss on the roof is significant in Alaska because it does give you the possibility of having ice damming happening, because what happens is you're going to have thawing and you're going to have freezing during the winter time, and the moss kind of acts like a sponge with water that's just constantly expanding and contracting, and what that does is that pushes up the shingles and gives the opportunity for water to intrude under the shingles, and you start developing a lot of ice damming, and that can be pretty expensive in Alaska, especially during the winter time, if you have some ice damming happening at the edge of the roof where you've just got a bunch of ice that's actually developed because you've got water that's actually intruded into the attic space itself at that point. So it's bad news. If you've got moss, you want to get that off your roof if at all possible. Last but not least, if you are looking at farming in Alaska, where's going to be the best place? This is a question I get every now and then, and really it's going to be the Mat-Su Valley or it's going to be the Kenai. I can't say definitively, this specific area within the Mat-Su Valley or the Kenai, but drive around a little bit. You're probably not going to be surprised. There's probably already going to be people farming in those areas. The growing season is really, really short. But the sunlight is going to be absolutely spectacular, so you can obviously get a lot of jumbo produce and everything that does develop up here. Also, real quick, for the cost of installing septic systems and all that, obviously those are just ballpark estimates. It's going to depend on the specific projects from what I mentioned before. So don't try to come back later and say, oh, well, Jamin told us it was only going to be $10,000. We don't know. It's going to depend on the project. Okay, anyway, thanks for watching. Sure hope this has been useful. If you have questions about moving to Alaska, let me know. If you're looking to buy, sell, or invest up here, obviously, I want to help you. Reach out to me. Let's make it happen. We'll see you next time.